Welcome, everybody, to this week's show. This is the You Can't Comp This NBA Trading Card Podcast. I am your host, Russell Gibson, and this week we are joined by Ryan from Gemrate. Ryan, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me back. Been far too long. Always
It
great
is.
being here.
It has absolutely been too long. We're just talking about that off air. It's actually been more than 12 months now, so we need to. Maybe we should book in the next episode like straight away after this for 12 months.
Probably not a bad idea.
We've got a time zone difference going on here. So what day and what time is it over there?
We are Monday, March 16th at 7:30 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the 17th at 10:25 a.m. over. That's like a useless piece of hobby information, isn't it?
It's all right. Just showing what we have to do to make this work.
That's it. Alrighty. So in the run sheet today, we've got a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to talk about obviously gem rate. We're going to talk about market cap because this is something we've talked about before, but I feel like we didn't explain it well enough last time. So this time I really want to get you
Mhm.
to teach us all about that. We're going to go through some of the new features that you've built into GemRate. We're going to talk about Wemby just because that's my current fascination, and your Cleveland Cavaliers, that's your hometown team. We were going to do a Genesis story, but I think the easiest thing to do for everyone, and also to save a little bit of time today, if you'd like to hear Ryan's Genesis story, which is actually very interesting, go back and listen to episode 65, because that's the first time that you actually came onto the pod and gave us your time very generously. Let's talk about the last 12 months of GemRate. What have been your successes? What have been your challenges? What's been going on?
Yeah, I think just big picture, like we've been doing the grading stuff now for, just sort of keeping everybody up to speed on hobby trends as it relates to grading activity for the last, I don't know, we've almost been doing it for 5 full years now. And last year was more the same. Obviously the big news towards the end of the year was the Beckett acquisition and sort of SGC falling off of people's options or sort of, outside of vintage baseball, they're not really doing much on that front anymore. So a lot of the hobby news was oriented around PSA, and we were just sort of keeping people up to speed on that and
Do you want to
trying
pass
to
comment on the acquisition of Beckett and SGC by PSA?
yeah, I mean, it's obviously people get frustrated because there's a lack of options out there. It seems like I don't know if it's because they got scared because of all the noise that was happening shortly after the acquisition and sort of legal hurdles that started to sort of maybe become a potential threat. But the reality of it is, it seems now that they're investing in Beckett, or at least sort of painting that picture they're going to invest in Beckett. So if they invest
Yeah.
in Beckett, that's a good thing. If Beckett would have been scooped up by some private equity firm or something like that, they would have just sort of been sucking cash out of it and not really reinvesting. And so there's a world where PSA, invests in Beckett and sort of makes it a viable brand and sort of reshapes what they look like because they have not been, you know, um, there's not been a lot of energy put behind it. They've just been really restricted.
Yeah, the investment you're referring to is they're apparently putting more stuff on. They're training this staff up more, and apparently also they're trying to improve their back end processes, which I think
Hmm.
has been a general criticism of Beckett for a long time, is that they've been using old redundant systems and not even using a computer system, allegedly.
Correct.
I don't know how true
Right.
that is, but yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, they're still doing a lot of stuff by paper. They've never really scaled and they've never really been interested. They haven't been incentivized to scale, so they didn't do it. So, the idea that PSA can take some of the learnings that they applied when they were taken private, when Nat Turner and his group took over, that they
Yeah.
could apply some sort of smaller scale version of that to Beckett is a positive for the hobby. Just if they started taking images, if they improved the order tracking, if they gave, just made it a lot more streamlined and seamless. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
But in general too, increasing the presence of Beckett, telling more stories about Beckett. They've been really limited there. So, anyways, I think it's positive. I also think that Beckett has some other assets that are interesting from the media standpoint. But it's good if Beckett doesn't go away. If Beckett goes away and sort of people are forced to really just or continue to be limited with their options, people are frustrated by PSA because they are sort of the liquidity engine for a lot of the hobby. When you can't grade your cards and get them back quickly, your money's sort of stuck in limbo, and
Yeah.
you can't grade new releases that pulls from breaks or from wax that you're opening, and so that limits people. That makes them pretty frustrated. It's just not the prices have gone up, so I think people are excited for there to be options. I think people would love to see PSA just continue to invest in hiring more and being more consistent and
Yep.
speeding their turnaround times up. They've done a lot of other stuff, which is nice with eBay integrations and stuff like that. But it's still people are frustrated. Their core users not really benefiting from it a lot. The power users are benefiting to a degree.
I think the price going up is the right thing to do. I think
Limit activity.
yeah, because I think if you increase the price on specifically PSA grading, people are less likely to send in smaller cards that have lesser value and, if you want to use the word, impact on the hobby.
Hmm.
Then I also think that makes other grading companies more viable. So, for example, what I mean by that is you'll send your cheaper cards to SGC or you'll send them to Beckett, and then there's
Hmm.
some financial equation where that sort of works out for everybody. And then hopefully also, too, that would reduce the input that's being sent to PSA and then reduce the turnaround time.
Hmm.
But that never seems to be well received by collectors. All they see is just another price hike, and that's kind of it. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, long term, it's good for them to sort of have fewer, marginal cards being graded, and
yeah.
even like I think you talked about it recently, but their posts are getting better. I talked to the PSA team about this a week or two ago. About I love that they're starting to bring more transparency about where there's, what people are missing when they're grading cards. Like that's good. That's the type of education the hobby
This
needs.
is
Like,
the stuff we need, 100%. Why? Yeah, I could not agree more. And they've actually just released another one too. We did a highlight of that post, I think it was a week ago. There was another one
mhm.
out just 2 days ago, which I think is like, this is the stuff we need. And essentially, they're the gurus of this particular field. Why aren't they leading that area? Yeah.
Totally, and they're finally sort of. I think for a long time they were nervous that there was, just there was a little bit of a bubble, I think, for people internally. I think they were sort of nervous that if demand would pull back, how quickly it would impact them. And now I think they understand that they have a backlog that's pretty significant, and so they're willing
Yeah.
to sort of be more forward. But they should have always been doing this, or at least recently been doing this. I mean, more recently than sorry, they should have extended it further back. When things started to pick up on their end, and I don't know what sort of made the alarm go off there, but the fact that they're bringing that to the market is really useful, and so I hope they lean into that and continue to do so. And it seems like they're
Yeah,
going to,
definitely.
but that's really positive. So, anyways,
Yeah.
there's the PSA stuff. I agree. The slowdown is a net positive in sort of the long run, but people are frustrated, and so they're going to have to deal with the backlash.
So we've segued so hard now. We're actually talking about you and your successes. Where have you? What have you done the last 12 months that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we've been heads down on the most interesting thing we've done is probably start to bring transaction data into the Gemrate world. We're not trying to become like a pricing engine or anything like that, but we are sort of just trying to have a different point of view on ways to make use of data that's pretty commonly referenced in the hobby, but sort of looking at it through a different lens. And so
Yeah.
this is very similar to the market cap concept, but we brought to market a report that we're just doing monthly and some data that's on the Gemrate side. I don't really promote it that actively yet because I haven't figured out this exact story I want to tell, but we're promoting summary data of transactions on eBay by players each month. And the idea is to sort of help people bring a frame of reference to market of how much money is being spent on a given player in a
Yeah.
given period of time. There's 2025 data there, there's a breakdown by month there. We have 2026 data on site now. But the idea is again, like how do you get a sense for how much money is being spent on, and you have it up on screen here, but our Instagram post in January was showing how much money is being spent on somebody like Shohei Ohtani versus Jordan versus a
Yeah.
Drake May who is thriving, right? And the idea is right now, most people comp things to sort of, it's really like active players. Like they're going to compare, Luca and Tatum. They're going to compare Flag and Wemby. They're going to compare these different players of sort of the same cut. And this is more of a what if we started to extend it across generations? What if we were to compare somebody like in baseball? You're comparing like Otani versus Ken Griffey Jr. versus Mickey Mantle. In basketball, it's like comparing somebody like Kareem versus Jordan versus LeBron versus Luca, versus Wemby.
Yeah.
It's like giving people a different frame of reference and letting people know how much money is being spent. And why that matters is in totality, it gives you a sense for just like how collectible is this player, which really matters. There's not a lot of great data points out there. There are some of the companies like Card Ladder and stuff like that do great work with indices. Those are really useful to help you understand like momentum behind a player.
Yeah.
And they also do. I referenced it a year and a half ago. The market cap data on their site is really valuable, but this is just a little bit of a different take on it. And so it's just sort of to add value behind that. And so we brought that to market at the end of last year. It's been well received, but I need to push it a bit harder in the sense of just making people aware of not only are we publishing, and not only can you see the people that show up in our Instagram post, but we have 5,000 players on our website, and you can go through and look at all the basketball players, and it allows you to do things that are interesting, like comparing how much money is spent on I don't know, just like modern day, like Con Knipple versus who do people compare him to that's an old timer? And like,
Can I interrupt you there for a second?
please,
So,
please.
just a second ago, you said it's so important. Can you just explain that? Because I think sometimes you forget for the mere models. For people who have not heard Ryan speak before, this guy is like uber intelligent. So, Ryan, break it down for someone like myself who doesn't understand why this is so important. Just
Yeah, I
explain
mean,
that to us. Yeah. And then
sure.
the
The big
second
pic.
thing is, can we do a walkthrough? So we'll go to your website. You tell me what to click on, and then we can actually do this as like a demo for people because this is the perfect
Yeah,
example of how we can run this through. Yeah.
yeah, that's perfect. So I mean, the idea here is again, it's just to sort of set the stage for how much money is being spent in the hobby on certain players. How collectible are they? And it's the main thing that I like it for is like, for example, the Cooper flag market has been blowing up, and it's supposed to give people a sense for like how much money is actually being thrown at him in a
Yeah.
given period of time, because then it gets you a sense for like how much is that being spent towards some of the all-time greats. Like more money in 2026, 50% more money has been thrown at Cooper flag than LeBron. And like it doesn't necessarily mean that people think Cooper flag is going to be better than LeBron, but you kind of have to think about what does that mean people are baking into his pricing, or is there sort of, are people overvaluing sort of the new tops cards that are coming to market because they're the first year of tops coming back to the market, and people are sort of overweighting that like it's 2012 Prism or something like that. And so it's just sort of trying to give a sense for like, if we take a step back, does the market make sense? And that's what this is trying to do, is sort of just let you compare and contrast players month by month across different players, across different sports. And that's the big picture of it. And that's kind of like the point that we're trying to bring to market. But also, one of the things when we go through the demo, I'll speak to is pretty different about what we're doing. Um, if you go to the top, yeah, and you go to the sales trends up top there, and then you go to sports, yep. One of the things that's sort of most differentiated behind, oh, there we go. One of the things that's most differentiated behind this data set is we're trying to show you the change from month to month. And what I mean by that is, so if you go to January 2026 and there's a monthly dollar change there, actually do me a favor. Russell, do you mind going to the top and clicking basketball? Yeah, just filter to basketball. And you go to monthly change. Yep, and click that. Yep. And sort by that and sort the other way. So it's descending. Yep. So what you'll see here, which is I think really interesting, is that okay, so right now we're sorting on the site by the amount of money that moved into a player's market in January compared to December. So it's telling you, okay, for example, if there was $5 million spent on Jordan in December 2026, there was 7 million spent on Jordan in January of 20. I'm sorry, December 2025 there was 5 million. In January of 2026 there was 7 million. I'm making these numbers up, but there's a $2 million increase in Jordan in this hypothetical. What I'm
Okay.
trying to do is say like, here's money that sort of moved into that player, because usually that comes at the expense of another player. Right now
Yeah.
the market's booming, so a lot of money is actually just new money's going in, but usually it's an exchange. Usually people are moving out of something into something else. And so what we're trying to highlight here is if you actually look at that data there, what you see is most of the players that went up in January went down in February. And what I mean by that is like you see momentum is really impactful here. And so an example that we're looking at is like Kobe Bryant had a $940,000 increase in spend in January compared to the prior month. But then in February, he had a $615,000 decrease in spend. And
Yeah.
what that usually means is it's not automatic, but the same thing happened with Steph Curry. The same thing happened with Wemby. On the flip side, players that kept going up were Con Knipple went up, Michael Jordan went up, Cooper Flag went up. Um, but most of the players went down. And so what you see here is a lot of these bursts or jumps in spend can be really short lived. And so what happens is this is a little bit of a leading indicator that prices may drop, because even though cards may not have transacted, fewer cards are transacting in this instance. And so what that means is the next time your card for a player that's on the decline moves to market, it's probably going to move for less unless something substantial has changed. And so the idea with this data, I haven't really gone into this in detail, so I apologize if this is too high level or I don't know if it's too nuanced, but it's trying to become a little bit more of a predictive variable or predictive data set, and allowing
Yeah.
people to say like, you can't necessarily, there's may not be a comp for the card, but you should know that the market for that player has turned a little less favorable. And so when
Yeah.
it does move and you wait for that comp, you're going to be getting less than you expect most likely. So you better oftentimes, if you want to move it, just move it before the market continues to move against where you would like it to go. So, anyways, that's sort of the big picture. It's a big comparison tool, but it's also sort of trying to provide a frame of or a frame of reference around where money's being spent
So can you
incrementally.
just spell that out a little bit clearer? I'll ask you two questions, and then I
Sure.
think this will explain itself pretty well. So, for example, if you look at Kobe Bryant, January to February, he's minus $300,000. What does that mean to? What does that data mean to you in this example?
So he's plus 300. So he's nine plus 940 in January, minus 600 in February, right? And so that's saying
Yep.
that in total in this year he's up 300,000 through the first 2 months of the year. So net net he's still up on the year compared to prior month in the last month in 2025, so December. But the
Yep.
idea here is to sort of say, oh, but the most important thing is he's the third most spend on this list when you look at basketball. And so this would probably fire up, the LeBron crowd in a sense of like there's more money moving in and out of Kobe right now, where LeBron's a little less like there's a lot the fluctuation's not as significant or the variance isn't as significant. And all that means to you is it's kind of like in the stock market, there's beta, there's volatility. The Kobe market's right now more volatile than the LeBron market. And net net, if you look at the totals for 2026, there 7 million has been spent on LeBron and 7 million has been spent on Kobe, but they're very two different ways that they got there. Even though the total volume is the same, you've seen a lot bigger swings with the Kobe market than the LeBron market. I can't
Yep.
explain why that's the case, but it's at least trying to tell people a little bit of a different story than if you're looking at indexes on card ladder or something like that. It's just trying to provide a little bit more context behind it. I can't tell you the why, but it's at least
No,
just
that's
to signal
okay.
like these markets don't move the exact same.
No, I'm just trying to, I suppose, just maybe give practical examples of what you might be able to take out this data. And then the second question was the concanuple. So January, he's plus 800,000. February, he's plus 292. What would that show to you, or what does that mean to you in that instance?
Yeah, so with Khan, I think the idea is that just people are continuing to invest, right? Like he's seeing incremental. From December to January, he saw almost $900,000 more spent on him than the prior month. And then he saw another 300,000 on that increase from January. And so anyways, he's seeing continued build in his market, which basically means, it's a very favorable. This is not necessarily a surprise, but it's trying to contextualize it a little bit to say like it seems like there's some sustained momentum as opposed to like if you would see a huge burst, like for example, VJ had a big bump in January, but then it pulled back pretty significantly in
Yeah.
February. VJ prices have probably adjusted, or they're probably still adjusting, candidly, if that's the case, because not everything's going to move immediately after the market sort of softens for him. So the idea is just to say, like, the con market feels pretty strong. You can probably sort of participate there, knowing that you're going to overpay, or that there's at least like a pretty active buyer market there, where like the VJ market has softened. And so if you're buying there, it might be a good time to take a look at them. Or if you're expecting to move something, the idea is that like, you may not get as favorable prices the last comp suggests because the market's pulled back a little bit. Not as many people are looking to buy VJ cards as they were a month ago.
Yeah. So I think my feedback to you in the past is that you've been building this absolute monster, but it's like, how do you consume this data, and how do you use it?
Mm-hmm.
And like my feedback to you today is like, this is years ahead of where you were the last time we had a chat. Like, this is like, I still think you need to know what you're looking at, but in terms of like the usability of the data, like honestly, congratulations to you. Like kudos to you is what I should be saying, because this is just
So
so much easier to look at, and you know what I mean. It's easy to get your head around. It's easier
yeah,
to consume. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. One thing you'll like too, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I didn't want to
No. No.
forget. So there's your boy Igor right there. He actually saw a little bit of a decrease in February. Oh, you're scrolling past him. Go back up just a little bit.
Oh, yep.
There he
Yep.
is,
Thank you. Yep.
right? So he's had, but this is important. So like he's had only 250K spent on him on eBay the first 2 months of the year. What this helps you do versus like Dylan Harper, who's right next to him, has had 4 times that amount. So it starts to help you think about like what would it take for the Igor market to start moving? It's like not
Yep.
that much money's been thrown at him. So if he goes out and throws up a big game out of nowhere, that market can move pretty quickly. It's just trying to help you think about too, like again, how collectible has that person been? How much money has been invested in that player's market? If you go back up to the top and if you hit that sort by 2026 summary at the top and do descending there, yep. If you hit that and scroll down, one of the things, hit it one more time, please, just so we're descending. one of the things I love about this is you were talking about Olajuwon recently, and like what you can see here is 6.8 million has been spent on Victor through the first two
Yep.
months of the year. Now,
Yep.
if you want to go down and you want to look at Hakeem, he's not as far down as you might think, given how little people talk about him in the hobby. So he's usually around Kevin Garnett. Yes, okay, so 330,000 has been spent on Hakeem, which again is kind of interesting in the sense of what does that mean? And what I use this to say is like, okay, same amount of money has been spent on Dirk, on Barkley, on Garnett, on Kareem, on Rodman. If you think about like the all-time greats, it's really interesting to think about like where he stands because he gets a lot of, the big guys in that generation, while there are some that get a lot of love, they do not they're not as respected in the sense of like being as collectible because again, they're bigs. And so that just hasn't sort of stood the test of time for the most
Yep.
part. However, it's interesting to think about like who's he compared to, and then it's funny to look at like the modern players, and it's like looking at Keontae George is right up there. Some of these players like Amen Thompson's there, Derek Queen is there. These are players who are in the same conversation. Why I think it's interesting and funny is just to think about like, okay, there's that much money being spent into these prospects, and then you look at the Hakeem market, and you're like, I get it. We're not projecting that he's going to be the next Hakeem, but it's just kind of funny to be like, okay, prospecting is really meaningful. No surprise there, but like this is how it sort of takes shape. And then it's interesting to take a step back and be like, where does somebody like Hakeem sit relative to some of his all-time greats? Where does he sit next to some of the emerging prospects? But it's just again providing a lens to let people sort of contextualize like hobby collectability.
Now you've touched on Hakeem. I want to run this card past you, actually.
Let's do it.
He's 8.5, 84 star. Currently trading at $2,000. I I think that is an absolute bargain. Total pop on
Hakeem's
that's
so
not.
interesting too because he
Yeah.
stayed relevant by becoming, he's teaching all the young guys the moves that he
Yeah.
did so well, right? I mean, there's the footage of him teaching Wemby that and stuff, and he's always sort of teaching the next generation, just some of his um, key moves that he had sort of made iconic. But anyways, Hakeem's interesting though
So
because he's quiet, he's not as relatable, but he's obviously incredibly meaningful in the significance of basketball.
putting my own bias aside, how would you rate that card as a purchase?
Oh man, that's hard to say on the fly. I mean, I think that Star is still getting some energy as it relates to just like people becoming comfortable with it becoming, real rookie cards for players or cards of significance. And so I would
I
say it's
feel like that
probably,
argument's done. I feel like Star is now considered to be the rookie card. Like I don't see.
which is great, right? Because I
Yeah.
disagree, but that's the thing. That's the beauty of it. So like you feel really confident about that. I feel like a lot of people are still trying to build up tolerance for
No,
that.
I
So,
don't feel passionate for it. I just feel like objectively, like you
right.
can't say that the Star. Okay, so let's just make it. This is how I rationalize it in my head. The Jordan rookie card. It was either Fleer, which was actually not his rookie card, but somehow people considered it to be, and then the Star, which is now comp wise, is much much higher than the Fleer. That's where I sort of. That's how I rationalize it, and that's how I sit with it. Why do you disagree?
Well, I just think not everybody's sort of on that same page yet. I think the market's still sort of figuring out how serious to take Star because there was a lot of, you know, theories around pump and dumps and shill bidding and all these things that sort of emerged as Star was sort of having its moment. There's just a lot of unclear agendas, and Star has started to sort of settle back in, which I think is good. But it's had some pretty significant variance in its movement, and I think that makes people skeptical of how authentic or organic that behavior is. And so that said, I think people are giving it a real look these days compared to what they
Yeah.
were. But I don't know that it's by default considered anything where people are going to lean. If they push game to shove, I still think they're going to give the more iconic 86 Flair a much more significant look. And the thing that we always talk about market caps. The 86 Flair market cap is orders of magnitude larger than the 84 Star still, right? So if you
Yeah.
go to like, okay, yes, this is great. So we're looking at a PSA 9.
Yeah, so the population on that is 17,000, nearly
Can you click into
18,000.
the PSA 10 down there? I'm curious what that shows. Okay, right. So if you look at the market cap for this card, it's 1.47 million on the and towards the right hand side there we're looking at the 86 Hakeem
Yep.
PSA 10. and it says 1.47 million, right? If you go look at one of those star cards in the highest grade, which may be a BGS 9, or I don't know that there's, I can't imagine there's a PSA 10 with the Hakeem. Let's just see where this lands. But I'm going to guess that it's still significantly lower than the 86 Fleer. And my point with that is just, even though the comp is higher, the total spend and the total people invested in, okay, let's see. So it's 219,000 for, what is this? The BGS
That's
85,
the 8.5. Yep.
which there's 102 of. It's not insignificant. So that's pretty good. Okay, so that's interesting. Um, but it's still, it was like a third of what we're looking at for the 86 Fleer in a PSA 10.
Yep.
So my point is that there's just, the market still has to move. Like, there's an opportunity. If you're my point with this whole thing is that if you're a star collector, there's room for more growth there, because the market may continue to shift and slowly move out of 86 Fleer as being the default rookie card for a huge group of iconic players. And so there's an opportunity. You're looking at that star card that's $2,000. Yeah, it's not like if you believe in the player and then you also believe in the set story, there's a really good argument to say that's an interesting purchase.
As usual, we've segued super hard here. Did you want to talk
Yeah,
about any other features that you've been developing in the last 12 months?
not really. I mean, we're going to launch a Chrome extension sometime in the next couple months. We'll start testing that, which I think will be really cool.
Yep.
I put a lot of thought into that. I've got a great designer helping build out what I think should be a really intuitive way for people to get more interesting information as they're sort of looking at marketplace listings. That'll be really cool.
Yep.
But no, that's it. I mean, we're gonna bring a lot of new thoughts to market as it relates to just like different products and different concepts this year. So just keep staying tuned. Follow us at social for the most part.
Yeah. Did you want to talk more about your eBay sales volume, or you've ticked that off pretty good?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, that's, it's hard when, if you haven't gotten accustomed to what we're doing there, it's a little hard maybe to make sense of it. And I would just say it's worth taking a look at, because it's just a different perspective on, it's starting to gain momentum, now that we've published it 4 or 5 months, and people are starting to understand like what stories we're trying to tell with this data. And so I'd
Yeah.
just say give it a look. It's different than comp sales. It's different than indices or indexes, right? It's just trying to tell a little bit of a different story. And if you're somebody who looks at, you want to understand like what's the Penny Hardaway market look like relative to some of the other all-time greats, or how much money is going into Penny compared to, who's an emerging, shooting guard out there, that's, or point guard, whatever, it's interesting just to sort of compare and contrast.
I think you need to do PSA type education posts around this.
You're right, I should, and
Yeah.
I don't. It's not because I'm lazy, although maybe that's part of it. I'm just not as good at designing social posts, and so, but there is an opportunity to educate better for sure on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and I appreciate that, because I don't take it for granted, but it's a lot of work, and I don't know exactly the story I want to tell. But yes, there's an opportunity to bring more people up to speed on what we're trying to accomplish.
As a D grade content creator, my advice would you is just sit in, like, do a screen grab and just sit there
Right,
and just talk about it for 10 minutes.
that's
And
probably
then,
right.
yeah. And then all you do after that, you get the transcript from the video, put it into AI. It'll tell you the bit that you need to do into a 1 minute video, and then you just clip it down. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
It's true.
don't sort of overthink it. Just kind of just do it, man. Because honestly, like, this stuff is so valuable, and what you're doing, like, so many people could and would benefit from it. Do you know what I mean? But I think, like, even for myself, my hurdle with your product is just, how do I use it?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It's
No,
I don't think you realize how good the stuff you do is. It's just like, like, how, like, what do you do? Yeah.
I
This is the
appreciate
next
that.
thing we've got in the run sheet, is the sales trend. Did you want to talk about this a bit more, or have we've done that?
Nah, I think we're okay there. I think that's sort
Yeah.
of the gist of what I wanted to sort of just,
Yeah.
bring people up to speed on some interesting data that we're taking a look at.
All right, great. So the next thing, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. On your previous appearances on the show, you were saying that Steph Curry
Hmm.
is undervalued, and you used your own data to predict that, I suppose. So can you please walk us through and use whichever tools that you want? You tell me what to go to. I'll bring it up onto the screen. How did you know that Steph Curry was undervalued? And because you've called this so accurately, it's almost like Nostradamus type stuff.
Well, my thesis on Steph, if you want to go to Card Ladder and go to their players tab. This is what we were doing at that time. Um, and their players tab does a nice job of sort of doing something similar to what I'm doing with the eBay data. It's a different way of doing it, but they're trying to roll up a bunch of activity for a player so you know how much money has been invested in his cards over time. I'm looking at eBay data for a certain period of time. I'm just looking at monthly data or yearly data. They're
Yep.
saying all the cards of all the cards in the catalog that we are following on Card Ladder that are verified, which varies depending on players. Like Jordan has thousands of cards, Wemby has hundreds of cards, but ultimately there's a selection of cards that they evaluate, and they're just rolling them up and saying, here's what all the prices are for these cards across the different grades for a player. And what they do is it just helps you know, like with Steph Curry, when we talked about this in 2024, the Steph Curry market cap was like 80 million. And the reason I brought it up was, and I can't, does it say anything about the market cap there? Oh, go back one screen. And if you go, okay, yes. So if you see the total market cap there, so Steph's market cap is now 188 million on Card Ladder,
Yep.
or 187 million. When we had that conversation in 2024, it was 80 million. And the reason I brought it up was Luka was also about 80 million. And my point was, Steph had already proven himself. He had already
Yep.
won that championship. He'd already gotten his MVP. The thing that was sort of keeping him from that elite, all-time top 10 list was now secured. And my point with him is just that he's got a very fragmented, unusual market because in 2009, people weren't collecting the same way they are today. And also, cards weren't being produced the same way they are today. And so it's not as obvious to know where to put your money if you're a Steph lover, if you're coming into the market fresh from the 2020 boom versus some of the more, recent players like a Luka or a Tatum or even a Jokic at this stage. And so my theory was just that the market's still trying to figure out how to value Steph, and that they were sort of giving him a little bit too much. I don't know, they're taking for granted where he sits relative to other players.
Yep.
And he's got a great catalog of cards, but you have to sort of find out those cards that are worth investing in that aren't necessarily all his rookie cards. And we started to see that with a lot of his case hits have obviously moved, but a lot of the case hits have moved in general, but the Steph ones have moved at a disproportionate rate.
His gold
Ultimately,
kabooms to 10 have been doing very well lately. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, those
Yeah.
things, I mean, people are now using those as sort of like high standing cards of significance for, people like him, LeBron, Kobe, if they exist, right? And so those cards have moved pretty, again, disproportionately relative to it. But the thing, I was looking at the stats to compare, and not to prove that I was right, but just to see how interesting it was that it played out, was that Curry market's up 121% since we had that conversation.
Yeah.
And that's pretty meaningful. And the way that I sort of can contextualize that is basketball index as a whole was up 52%. So Curry's up more than 2 times the basketball index. The high end market's up 63% according to Card Ladder over that time. And then to qualify it, LeBron's up 41%, Luka's up 15%, and Kobe's up 106%. I don't remember if I said Jordan, but Jordan's up 93%. So anyways, Curry's grown the most out of all those players. And those are all players with big established followings. And I think people just came to realize over the last couple of years that like the Curry market's undervalued, and we can start to put a little bit more weight into some of his Panini era cards, or again, they're starting to, some of his top stuff has moved quite a bit as well. But that was sort of the thesis. It's just there's the supply is not as obvious as far as where to invest if you're a Steph believer, and the sort of the long-term story and sort of the potential appreciation, and just again the fact that he's so iconic but also so relatable is what makes him stand out relative to some of the other players we've talked about in the past. So that was my
Yeah.
thesis there. And the tool that we're using, though, again, that I think is helpful to tell the story is the Card Ladder player values and market caps, because that is a very significant and unique view of how much money is invested in a player. And again, it's not perfect, but as far as data goes, it's about as good as it gets for a lot of these stories we're trying to tell. And so it's really interesting, and I think like you have Wemby up on the screen, for example, and like if you look at Wemby, which is also hilarious, by the way, this would be a good example to look at Wemby versus Kareem through this line. Versus Hakeem. So like the Wemby market's 25 million, but here's the challenge: the Card Ladder market cap for this is very limited. They only track 39 cards. For Steph, they track 230. For Jordan, they track thousands. Right? This is where the Card Ladder market
Yeah.
cap
Yeah.
going
And
to do justice.
even putting people into Card Ladder, the actual ladder itself, like there are some really big player emissions, let alone card emissions. So yeah, you're right. There is some flaws with this data. Yep.
Like the fact that Hakeem has 75 cards, and Wemby only has, 39. it just shows you that they're still building some of this stuff up. It's not a focus
Yeah.
for them right now, and that's fine. We have limited resources, but it's just helping you understand the story of, again, there's 5x the amount of money in Wemby versus Hakeem, right? And like, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's wrong, but it just sort of trying to help you. Is Wemby does Wemby have to be? And that's again a fraction of the actual cards that exist in the Wemby market. It's probably much more like 50 or 75 million that's actually invested in Wemby if this were sort of we're brought up to speed. And
Yeah.
so does that mean that he's going to be a 20x player over Hakeem? I don't know, but that's sort of what the market's suggesting to some degree, or at least you don't have to be a better player, but you have to be relevant in a way that's significantly more meaningful than just the basketball story. And so potentially Wemby could be that, but again, that's just saying like there's a lot priced into players markets that are newer or emerging or prospects, and you really
Yeah.
need to think about like what has to happen for this to actually hold, or you're going to be holding the bag at the end of the day.
Yeah. 100%. I think the last 12 months or so, that's where my head has definitely gone. It's like, you've got X amount of dollars and you can spend it on whatever you want and whatever makes you happy. And so I'm not trying to convince people to buy into breaks or not buy into breaks, but I think that's also where my head is going. It's like, well, should I be spending my money on the newest rookie that's coming out when we've seen time and time again, the graph goes up, the graph goes down? Like, it's like, how many times do we need to see that data set before we sort of, fix that problem or, address that issue, like whichever way you want to say it? And then the thing that I think, particularly into your Steph Curry prediction, I think my personal one was Jokic. And Jokic has spiked so hard since I've been looking to buy a big-ish Jokic card. And I just feel that in my particular situation, I just missed that train. And now I feel like I can't hop on. Do you know what I mean? And so this is where my head's at. So my secondary or my follow-up question to you is, so I've got the screen sorted out. I've filtered it down to basketball. It's sorted by total market cap. Can you just walk us through a couple of examples here of, if you look at these numbers, do you say, okay, this is under, this is over? How do you use that data to guide
This is
yourself,
sorted by
I
market
suppose?
cap right now. I mean, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Again, this is sort of where I'm just like looking at somebody like, okay, this is a good. We can't really do Wemby because his catalog's just not the same.
Yeah.
Edwards is maybe a little bit better. Like, I like to look at like Edwards versus, um, like Shea versus Edwards is actually pretty interesting. So we're looking right now at Shea has 31 million according to the card ladder in his market cap.
Yeah.
From his 163 cards that are captured. Again, that's just a fraction of the Shea market. Edwards has 216. Obviously, Shea should, in theory, have more cards than Edwards because he was a rookie 2 years prior. But point being is, the Edwards market is at 23 million, and the Shea market's at 31 million. And the question is again, like, who do you think is ultimately going to become like maybe potentially the face of basketball, or already is the face of basketball through the basketball lens purely? Shea has outperformed. But from like a charisma standpoint, there's an argument that Edwards is sort of like shaping up to be the face of the league. And so it's interesting to think about like, what does Edwards need to do? If Edwards were to win a championship year, does he move up to the Shea level? Does he start to
Yeah.
move, does his market go up by 40% or more than that? Probably more than that realistically. But it's again trying to help you understand like how collectible is a player and what should you expect if certain things happen for a player or don't happen for a player. Like if Edward, Luka's a perfect example. Luka has
Yeah.
not moved in the past year and a half since we last talked about it, right? Luka is still around 80 million or something like that. Luka's at 80 million, yeah. So he's still
Yeah.
roughly the same as what he was, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And that's
I
after
actually think
he moved to the Lakers since
I
then.
actually think there's an argument to be made he's actually gone down, because if you think about it, more cards would have been added to his collection.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. They probably have added
And
more
some of
cards
his
there.
really big RPAs in the last 12 months have actually crashed pretty hard. I might actually have bookmarked this particular post because it was like a post-COVID. Here we go, the worst COVID bias, and Luca was in that. And
Wow.
I actually don't particularly think this is like, I think that at $180,000, that's amazing, and I think that's the type of thing that you put that away and that's it.
Right.
But
Right.
I
Right.
also think that that is going to affect his numbers.
For sure, and that does
Yeah.
affect. You're right. So that the market cap probably does overstate the actual true impact, which is good. That's a great observation. It's not perfect in the
Yeah.
sense of there's more cards that might be added to it. But his index is up, I think, over the last year and a half, whatever. What that probably means is I actually don't know how to rationalize that or sort of speak to it because if his higher end stuff's moving down so dramatically, what's sort of sustaining? But, Luca may have become more collectible to the average player or the average, hobbyist because he's now in the Lakers. There's sort of people, and, it's just interesting to think about. But my big story with the Luca is that there's 80 million invested in Luca, and that's
Yeah,
putting him ahead of
yeah,
Magic Johnson at 70 million, Kareem at 35.
yeah,
Let's just say he doesn't go on to do anything. He doesn't win an MVP, he doesn't win a title. His market is going to work its way down to these players that are in the 20 million range,
yeah,
which is still, very respectable players, but realistically, he probably moves even lower than that. And so
yeah,
the point is just saying like Luca still has a lot baked into his card prices.
yeah.
The market doesn't fully reflect it. And so if he doesn't start to materialize some of these wins or MVPs, his market's going to pull back quite significantly. Like they can only sort of hold for a long time. We saw this with Trey. Trey Young sort of withstood the test of time for a while as he was sort of people were wondering if he was ever going to sort of reach his sort of potential. And then it's sort of the last couple of years, it became pretty obvious that he was not going to be a winning player and reach his potential the way that people thought. And his markets pulled back significantly. Not saying Luke is going to do the same thing, but again, point being is like people need to be aware of how
I don't think
easily this story
he's
could
not
change.
even in this list, man. I hear he is here under
Oh yeah,
Elgin.
two
Oh my
million
god,
now.
yeah, two
Wow.
million, yeah. So that's crashed hard. Hey, just going back to Edwards though, my problem with Edwards and where I'm very, very like I'm not buying into Edwards at all. He has to go through Jokic and he has to go through SGA just to make it to the finals, and then he's
Totally.
got at least Tatum, maybe the Knicks, maybe the Pistons waiting for him. So the other thing to factor into is the Minnesota ownership. I'm not actually that convinced that all the moves they're making are to win basketball and they're actually trying to just balance their books a little bit. Like they've gone through ownership
Yeah.
change and they can say
Right.
all they want about wanting to win games, but nothing they've actually done the last 12 months. Like they gave up Dillingham already
Yeah. 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 Where they end up moving him?
to the Bulls.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's right. That was part of the IO trade. Um, Yeah, I mean, look, but the thing that's important about what you're saying is that you're not alone, and a lot of people have factored that. So the thing that you'll see with Edwards is that if he does achieve his goal, his market will move more than like what Shea would move. If Shea goes on to win the title again this year, it's already priced into his market.
Yeah.
People still believe Jokic has a better chance than Edwards. So if Jokic goes on and wins a title this year, his market's going to move, but it's not going to. If Edwards goes on to win and beats all the teams that are ahead of him that you just stated, or sort of teams that are in his way, his
Yeah.
market will jump significantly more because it's holding a little bit steady right now, given sort of like what people see as the obstacles in his way. But if he does it, he starts to become this new face of the league, which sort of changes the story, the narrative from him. And that's what has to happen in our hobby. Like you have to sort of do something unexpected, and that sort of has to level up how you're appreciated in the hobby. And so, anyways, point being was with Edwards, there's more risk, but then maybe the floor isn't like you know the floor is maybe higher with him to some degree, so the risk might not be that significant. But the point is he may jump pretty significantly if he does actually get to the finals.
Yeah. I think my two favorite buys at the moment in the league is Tatum. I'm actually just working on a video at the moment. Hopefully that'll come out tomorrow or the day after. But I think the other one too is Jokic. And looking at his market cap, there's nothing in my mind that's really changed after looking at this. Like he's still 3 million less than Durant at the moment.
Can you click into
Um,
Jokic real quick? I'm curious to see where he was the
and
last
even
time we
looking at
chatted about it.
Tatum, I think Tatum is a fantastic buy at the moment. Like he's actually gone up since being injured. Like,
Can
can you
you
believe
change
that?
the I
Yeah,
believe it because people are.
yeah,
Can you go to the 2 year on him? The part of the thing that's been interesting because I had a Tatum card that I sold a couple months ago that I was pretty happy with where it ended up. Okay, so
yeah,
Jokic was at like 42,000. Okay, so Jokic is up like 50% over the last year and a half. So he would actually be, which is fascinating. He would have been on the lower end of all those players I mentioned, and it just goes to show you how much the high end of the market's moved over the last year and a half. Which is
yeah.
he would be below Curry, he'd be below Kobe, he'd be below Jordan, he'd be right around LeBron. But the point is, people are more willing to invest in Jokic now. I think like people have accepted that Jokic is really special, and so I
So
think that's fascinating. But he still has not moved
this
quite
is
as much
just
as
this has just happened in the last 24 hours, and I actually think this is going to be a really important sale moving forward because that is a lot more than I would have expected to happen.
wow. Where did
I
this
mean,
sell?
just
Oh, Golden. Jokic Gold sold on Golden for
and it's
319,000.
it's been years since this sold, so obviously a lot's happened in between their sales. So that line is a little bit deceptive in some ways, but at the same time too, those numbers don't lie, and what you're seeing is like a true reflection of now sort of where we're at with this guy. So I I think that in terms of a buy for me, that's like an absolute A plus. What's your who's your next player to be looking for? So the last time you came onto the show, your prediction was Steph Curry. What's your next 12-month prediction?
Oh man, I don't have a good player
And
that
I'm
I'm
not
sort of.
letting you off the hook on this one either. Like I genuinely want to make your life hard at this point.
Well, to distract from this for a second, I did like your Tatum comment. I do think, like, it's interesting to see somebody who has a severe injury come back ahead of schedule, right? Like, that's what's been interesting is like the Tatum market's not necessarily moving because Tatum is better. It's just that Tatum came back so much sooner and could impact the Celtics title run again this year that the market's reacting really favorably. He also had a big setback, like his card prices took a big hit. But I think that's super interesting. I don't know. I mean, I have a really hard time thinking about any of the prospects because it's really hard to make sense of the stuff we were talking about pre-show and then earlier, which is like the tops phenomenon is really hard to gauge how significant that is. Like people
Yeah.
are still figuring out what that means, and I don't necessarily think people are wrong for overpaying for first-year top stuff again or first-year back because I think there are some dynamics that are different, like the on-card autos and stuff like that, and Chrome. Um, but I would shy away from most of the rookies and younger guys at this stage. I the
I
person who
actually
I
don't think
honestly
he. Sorry, man. Just to interrupt you, I don't think he took that bad of a battering. So this is the last 12 months. Like, look at that. I have never seen anything like this from a player having an
well,
injury, like a 12-month
it's
injury,
pretty.
and
He went down to eight from 800 though to 600, 550. I mean, like meaningfully in the sense that he was down 30%, 20%, and now he's picked back up. So it's not his market didn't crash, and he's obviously
no,
proven enough where he's got a floor
yeah,
there. But
uh, he's
I don't know how Halliburton did by comparison. Same kind of injury, obviously. Um, I have okay, so I haven't answered your question while we're looking up Halliburton.
thank you.
Where's his silver prism? Oh, nice. Look at you. We're just looking at the Halliburton silver prism here. Like his card price is probably at. Oh, his have adjusted more than I would have guessed too.
So he's at 340 at the moment.
His have almost
Market
returned
cap
back though, which is fascinating.
154,000.
I would argue that people are excited about the Pacers next year because they're going to have a top pick and it's a great draft. And so maybe that's part of why his prices have recovered. But the Halliburton market's recovered way better than I would have expected, especially because he's had a couple setbacks. Okay, so the player that I would give a look at, and this is not going to be a favorable case, but I just think is worth it, is KD. And the reason
Yeah,
is he's been playing really well, and nobody's talking about the Rockets anymore. You know, Şengün's been out. I can't remember how long he's been out or why he's been out. I think he has a back injury, but they are still a formidable, player in the West right now. And I do think
yeah.
like if KD could take that team to the next level, and he is the big addition for them this year, that will do a lot for his legacy. And my point with that is like I don't believe in KD necessarily as being dramatically undervalued long term, although there's a good case for that to be made. But he's again a player that nobody's talking about. That if he makes a run, his market could move pretty significantly. He's always going to be this. He doesn't have a home player, which makes it a little bit tough for him. Which is he just
Yeah.
doesn't have a team that people identify for him. I mean, OKC maybe the most, or obviously his Warriors run, but like he's been so, um, just such a player on the move and sort of not somebody that was super relatable and people sort of he brought a lot of negative goodwill towards him over the past few years. There's not as
100%.
much enthusiasm
Yeah,
for him, but
yeah.
I feel like if he actually brought Houston to the next level, that's a player who I like would give a deep look at, just in the sense of like it's very viable and he's been playing really well and he's obviously the leader there.
Yeah. Yeah, I
You hate
actually
that? You hate that take?
no, it's totally fine. I think what you said about Durant is he's a very he's an enigma. I think that's the best way to say him. And even in his sort of personal life with like the multiple Twitter accounts and the burner accounts, and now that's sort of coming, like the whole thing is just a
Uh-huh.
bit strange, right? And so I think there's that part. And then I think you're right about him changing teams. I think at the end of the day, people are purists when it comes to basketball, and they don't like the idea of sort of being guns for hire. But I think my take on Durant is that I think you're 100% right. This guy's undervalued. Like the fact that he's, what was he, lower than Edwards
Hmm.
on the market cap, like that is just absolutely, it's diabolical to me. I think for me though, it's in 20 years time. That's when you're actually going to, when
Totally.
all of the social media dust is settled, then people start to look back and think,
Hmm.
what's an undervalued asset? Who is somebody that no one's buying up? And like the star rookie cards, I think it's going to be the same thing with that. At one point, someone's going to be like, hang on a second, like this doesn't make sense. These are so cheap compared to actually what they should be.
Yep.
I think that's where you're going to see it there. That's my personal take. So
Yep.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's going to be a very long hold. You have to wait for everything to transpire, before it comes back. And
The other thing with
yeah.
him, I think, is interesting. Like, so I would say Edwards is probably the player that I'm still investing the most in, but I'm like, just because I'm mostly intrigued by what he could do for the league and what his
Oh,
ascent could
so is
look
that
like.
your almost disclaimer? Is it? I
Well,
didn't
yeah,
realize you were
I
buying
do have
into
a little bit
Edwards.
invested in
Yeah.
Edwards, not a lot, but I mean,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
like, but I
Yeah.
do have some invested in Edwards just because I just think he can really become the face of the league, and people enjoy watching him and sort of just following him. He's
O-
just an interesting
Okay.
player. His charisma's
Okay.
there,
So
but
the question is, why didn't you buy KD instead of Edwards then?
why didn't I? I just
Yeah.
don't believe in KD's story in the long run. Like, I think he's gonna.
Yeah.
I think exactly what you suggested. Like, I'm not in it for the 20-year hold. That's not how I do this. I
Yeah.
don't have the patience for that. Like, I don't have the money for it. I can't just tuck away money for 20 years and sort of let it appreciate when I'm building a company that I need liquidity for. And
Yeah.
so it's too challenging. The KD story is too tricky. The Edwards one is interesting because, like, that means something to sort of say you were either early on Edwards or you have really rare cards of Edwards. The KD sort of story is different, and it just doesn't showcase the same way. Like, if you go to a show, people aren't going to get excited about a really rare KD card the way they're going to get excited about a
No.
really
No.
rare Edwards card. And
Absolutely
that's
not.
that's
Yeah.
my ultimate argument, is that Edwards has cachet. If you bring around, I always joke around about this. I'm like, if you had to showcase one card, you had to wear your hobby necklace to a show. Like, people aren't going to be wearing KD cards around, but people are going to be wearing Edwards cards, Ant Man cards around, and things like that. And so
Yeah.
that's part of this whole thing that people forget, is that prospecting looks abnormal because it is. It's fashion for people. It's sort of showcasing, here's things that I believe in that the market's still trying to figure out, and I'm putting my foot forward saying, like, this is my player, this is my card. And so people overpay, people overinvest in those markets, and they correct for sure. But it's definitely like an identity thing where it's like, you can always buy an older card of KD or a LeBron or somebody, Jordan, and that's interesting, but it doesn't always. It's not going to be as exciting for people initially.
No. We're actually pretty much at the end of the show, man. So why don't we do one more topic?
Let's
And
do
the
it.
headline for this topic is current pop culture stories. Pick
Hmm.
one of the three: Kevin O'Leary, aka Mr. Wonderful; Stephen Aoki, card shopping with Kim Kardashian; or the Logan Paul Pikachu illustrator selling for 16.49 million.
So I will go quickly on this one because I already just touched on it unintentionally, which is, I don't know if you watched the Oscars at all yesterday, but Kevin O'Leary, who is in Marty Supreme, was there, and he was wearing the triple logo man
Yeah.
around his neck at the Oscars and catching a ton of heat for it. Nobody liked it, right? But card people liked it, of course, because it's very interesting, and obviously they understand why he's doing it. Um, I
Yeah.
think that is interesting. I mean, he does make it a little look pretty cringe to the average person, and that's not going to probably play out the exact way he wants. But I do think this idea, like, again, he's doing exactly what I just said, which is showcasing sort of like what matters at a really large scale. I mean, at a
Yeah.
significant scale at the Oscars, right? To all these people who don't even understand that cards are significant again, or that they've ever even had their moment. And
Every
so,
single collector out there should be kissing this guy's feet. The
right,
trick, the trickle down is going to
mhm,
be real. Yeah.
right.
Fanatics. I actually wonder if like someone like Fanatics is propping this guy up. Like you can't buy this
Probably.
type of you can't buy this type of advertising.
Totally. I mean, he obviously now has enough invested in it where he benefits from making it more significant, right? Like, the more people care
100%.
about cards, the
He
more
only cares
the
about money. He doesn't care about the hobby. Like
totally,
just let's preface
totally,
that. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
totally
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
not care one bit. It's an
No.
asset, and he's
Yeah.
just trying to
And that's it.
bring
Yeah.
shed light on, this is something of value, and more people might research it. But yes. So anyways, I think for the purposes of what we're talking about, and sort of just to close, out that story. Like that is fascinating and will have a trickle down for sure. Not all of it
Yep.
will be positive, but in general, people will be aware of it, and that ultimately sort of will spill over into more people participating. Whether it's slow or accelerated, I don't know, but there's certainly going to be more people understanding that this is a thing that they should at least be looking at. So I thought that was fascinating. I do think their index, or sort of their portfolio of assets, is interesting. I don't know how reflective it is of reality of pricing, but ultimately I do think like they have a very significant point of view that these extremely rare cards are going to mean something in the long run and are going to be highly desirable, and that's probably the right view. It may not always be right. Like the card market may sort of correct pretty meaningfully at some point in time, and that's going to look pretty foolish. But over again, this 20-year cycle, there's probably a good chance that that means something. And so, I think it's very interesting. I think it's fascinating, but it's not relatable to the average person. It just makes
Yeah.
it look like people are making up numbers, and that's hard to sort of fathom or make sense of.
I think there's levels to this game, and I think there's the Kevin O'Leary Shine gang that trade in $1 million cards, and then there's people that dabble in the $1,000 cards, and then there's people that dabble in the $1 boxes and
Yep.
hunt through the $5 boxes to try and find a $10 card. And like, I'm not judging any one of those particular three groups, but I personally sit in the $5 to $10 box. That's where I like find my love and find my joy. And like, I find that very hard to see those prices. Like even that Jokic card that we were talking about today, I think that's one of the best buys that we've seen for a very long time. But at the same time, too, you know what I mean? I find that hard to digest. Like it's a crazy number, right? So when you
Yeah.
see like a 15 or a $20 million card, I think that's probably like where, my problem is. It's like, I think if his content is going to be meaningful for a long time, is how is he going to relate to a common collector, to an average
Hmm.
collector? Maybe that's the right word to say. So I think
Hmm.
that's where I think in the immediate, like today, he's fantastic for the hobby. He's bringing more eyes into it. He's going to bring a lot more money into it. But at some point, we're going to tune this guy out because what
Right.
has he got to offer? For the thousands of people out there that want to listen to a free podcast. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He is an interesting sort of representative for the hobby, though, because his show, Shark Tank, is sort of like the new, American dream show of just like these are people who are just average Joes, and then all of a sudden, they're on TV pitching this big idea, and so
Yeah.
he has an interesting audience. I do think he's a pretty interesting, just like spokesperson. But yes, it's definitely again not relatable for most.
Yeah.
So it'll be fascinating to see sort of what his role is ultimately. And to your point, he doesn't care about cards, so who knows how long he'll do this.
No, definitely. That's right. That's right. It's exactly right. Yeah. He
All
might
right.
be in and out in 2 seconds. All right.
Yep.
Closing thoughts. What do you got for me, man?
That's it. I'm spent. This was always great.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me talk a little bit about what Gemrate's been up to. I'm always,
Yeah.
as I always sort of leave this as my parting message, I'm always open to feedback, always open to ideas.
Yeah.
Things we can be doing better. I'm always out there, thinking sort of where we can extend. But I love to sort of have input whenever I can get it. So that's kind of the story on my end.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely wonderful to catch up with you. I I love what you're doing. I really appreciate everything that you do for the hobby, and I think that you've made such huge strides on your website, and I can't wait to see what the next 12 months bring. So thank you so much, mate. Yeah.
I appreciate it. This is episode number 5 for me, and it's always a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks everyone at home for listening. Really hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye. Hey, mate, I'm going to end the stream, but you just have to
I gotta
stick
leave it
around
up.
in the room
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
afterwards. Yeah.